Okay, well, here we are. We have a new project for Mantis Garage, and it's project CBR954 Basket case. As you can see, we've got a plethora of parts, all in a mixed bag of eBay boxes, and there's some redundancy to parts. I've got multiple exhausts, and I got a couple fairings up here. We're spread out. Fortunately, I have this engine which didn't come with the bike. This is the motor that came with the bike. And if you can see here, the previous owner probably crashed it, and that's why I put it up on eBay. It is a running engine, but the center case has been cracked here, and there's an oil galley in this area which the crack went through that, and so it probably started gushing oil out when it was running, and the person decided they didn't want oil all over their back tire when they were riding, so they decided to get a different engine. And so they put this up on eBay, and the person that I bought the bike from didn't realize that, but he had got it from somebody else that was putting the parts together and trying to piece together a bike out of a zillion different parts. And this has been sitting open with no valve cover and no side cases on it for a few years in a barn with hay and mice and everything running in and out of it. So it really needs to be taken apart and cleaned. And fortunately, since I have that other engine, I'm going to replace the center case here, and then we won't have a leaking motor when we get it all done. And I guess you guys get to watch that process, so enjoy. So we're back, Mantis Garage, and we're on Motor B. This is the one with good cases, and it's actually got a spun rod bearing, so it's got a really bad knock. And I did a motor swap for a guy, and I ended up with this motor years and years ago, and I've hung on to it, and now it's coming useful. So here's my little brother Jack, who is going to help me with the project. I've been seeing him in the shot a little bit. Say hi, Jack. Hi. So we didn't see this step on the first motor because this was already apart, but I've got a puller here, and we're basically just gonna do an outside pull on this. Spin it back. Yeah. Okay, so you got it real good and tight. Yeah. Whack. Oh, we've got like 3 of these. So, there we go. Easy squeezy. Just like we meant to do it. There's a huge crack right there, which probably goes from here all the way down through this oil galley and over on all the way to the other side. And somebody tried to weld it all back together and put some JB weld on it and all sorts of other jargon, but the bad part about that is apparently they got some slag or some sort of JB weld or maybe some grinder grit or something in this oil galley, and it pumped a little burr over into the center bearing, and it tried to push it out right here, and so there was a little burr that got stuck, and it put a nick in the crank right here, which spun around and around and around and started to chew the bearing out. So it's really good that that didn't get continued use, because that main bearing right there is in the middle and there's a lot of thrust on that bearing. So eventually this motor would have had another problem even if that didn't continue to leak. But here's our new center case that came from the other motor, and you can see this one had a bearing let go because there's all this gold debris right here, which is bronze actually, and this is from the rod bearing going apart, and that didn't completely frag, so the cases are still fine, but the crank from that motor is toast and one of the rods is toast. So we are going to take this case, adapt it to this engine. We're going to take some parts from the clutch from the other motor and some sensors from the other motor, and we're going to put it all back together, and we're going to build a bike. So here we are, project 954 basket case, and I've got the center bearing out here because if you can see on this original case we had some scoring that took the babbitt away down to the brass, and I found where it was scored on the crank and I cleaned that up, and now I'm going to have the bearings from this other center, which I've checked and they're the same size. And if you've never had a motor apart to this point, the way to identify the bearing size is with these letters here: B, B, C, which is the center bearing, B, and B. So we know that the center here needs to be a C, and the crank has another number on it, and that's 22222. So it's all twos across. So we need a B, or no, wait. We need a C2 bearing here. And so if this case has C2 bearing, then we know it's going to be the same size, which I've already verified it does. And so there's actually a chart for this in the book, or I'm sure you can find it online if you need to do this from scratch and replace all your bearings, or if you feel like doing that. In this case, I'm not going to order bearings because these bearings are fine. And the crank was bad for the other one, but not the main bearings. It was a rod bearing that went out. So fortunately, we can reuse some of the bearings from this case, but I'm not going to reuse all of them. What we'll do, this is the new case half. I'll take these peripheral bearings here and I'll swap them over to this case here so that they match the bearing surface of the crank that we're continuing to use. And so then the only one that I'm really changing is the one in the middle that had that scoring. And we're going to use that one from the other case because it's in better shape. So if you follow all that, that's the process. And we'll swap that over. And I've got my surfaces, my mating surfaces all nice and clean here. We'll take some gray RTV, high temp, ultra gasket maker stuff, Yama Bond or Honda Bond, whatever you want to use for this. But I'm going to use Permatex gray and spread it all around here in a nice thin coat. Not in this area so much, and definitely not in these areas here, but all around the outside so that it doesn't leak when I get it all together. And I'll set my camera back over here and you can watch. So here we are, it's another hot day in paradise. I've got my bearings swapped over from the one case to the other case, so they all stay the same, but I did notice one difference. The bearing surfaces themselves on the case have dimensions too, and the dimensions between one case and the other case are not the same. So, before I get too far ahead of myself, what I'm going to do is plastic gauge my bearing surfaces and make sure I have the proper oil clearance so that when I put it all together for final assembly, I know that the bearings are not going to be too tight and cause galling in there, because the bearing surfaces themselves are fine, but if the case surface where the bearing lands is smaller, it might not work. So I'm going to do this before I get too far, and I might possibly have to order bearings. I don't really want to have to order bearings, but I'm fine with using these old ones as long as they're in good shape. So we'll put some plastic gauge on there, bolt the case all together, torque it down, torque it, and we'll be good. Here I've got my handy dandy green plastic gauge.
Hello, Rick.
Ollie.
How extravagant you are, throwing away women like that. Someday they may be scarce. And I think now I shall pay a call on Iran. Maybe get on the rebound, huh?
When it comes to women, you're a true Democrat, 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 Democrat.
Now we just take the little wrapper, which has these handy dandy measurements here, and we'll check our clearance. And at this point now, I've got my bearings where I want them. I've cleaned everything off really good, and I'm going to start putting my components back in there to verify that I've got everything in place before putting the case tabs back together. And I also need to apply my Permatex Ultra Gray Rigid High Torque RTV silicone gasket maker. So that stuff right there is pretty critical. You don't want to use normal RTV because it's not really going to hold up with the high torque that happens between these two mating surfaces. So this is what's really special. You got to use either Yamabond, Honda Bond, or this Permatex Ultra Gray. Okay, so other than that, plastic gauged our bearings. Our bearings all came out good. We swapped some things around there to make it good, and just verified that we didn't get anything too tight. And now, at this point, I'm going to just start putting the Permatex on there.
I shall pay a call on
project CBR basket case, CBR954 came my way and had cracked center cases, which the previous owner didn't realize. But I was the right person to find it because I had another motor, miraculously. So now we've got that all back together. We need to continue the assembly process of the motor, get the oil pan on it, get the rest of the stuff on it that needs to be in there in place before you put it up in the frame, and then start bolting the swing arm assembly onto it, and then drop the frame onto it, and then make it roll. So that's the process now. Could have stopped the video just with the engine rebuild, but I think maybe we'll try to show the whole thing. I don't know, we'll see. I might edit it out. Maybe not, who knows what's happening. All right, watch. Watch. Okay, so here in my continuing effort to make the best motor I can make out of the parts that I have, I took my camshafts out because I wanted to make sure that I don't have any rust on the cam lobes, which I do. And there's also a bunch of dirt in here because this thing sat with the valve cover off for a really long time. And I also don't know the history of this motor because it came off of eBay and yada yada yada. So here we are, I've got the cam out and it's totally dirty, which I'm really glad that I took it out. And there's also really rusty lobes. So I'm going to take the cam out of my other motor and I'll swap cams. And I'll keep the bearing journal all together because these are line bored and you don't want to swap the bearing caps and stuff like that, even though the cam is going with the bearing. It's more important to keep the bearings all together as a unit there. And other than that, the cams should be the same because they're the same engine effectively. So we'll just toss this one. And we've got some dirt in here and some corrosion on the buckets, so I'll replace the buckets that look corroded or otherwise compromised. And my bearing journals look good here, which is nice. Shows that it didn't have loss of oil while it was running. Because these surfaces here can just get torched as soon as there's no oil pressure in the top end, because it kind of rides on a cushion of oil. Boogie. Oh, supplies.
I didn't know he had this. What are you doing, honey? How many motorcycles do you have, my love?
Too many to count, keep track of. Say hi, wife.
Bye.
Okay, hey, look at this. We made major progress today. We're almost rolling. So let's go outside. Grab that. Woods yet, but look at that. Rolling chassis. Looks sick. Gives me goosebumps. This thing's gonna be sweet. Oh, and there's my Triumph.
Hey, Dad. 4 o'clock in the morning.
98 speed triple.
Everybody's here but the police, and we'll be here anyway.
Good bike. Had it for many years. Oh, they look good next to each other. One's complete and one is just so stripped. But look at that, it's got wheels. Oh, it looks tiny. That's awesome. Yeah, I know. Never finished the trike. Leave me alone. Alright, what's up YouTube? About a month later and $300 in parts. We're going to start the final process of filming for this build. The 900 runs, you haven't seen it go from where it was at to this point because I just didn't film everything and I was waiting for parts. It's just hard to flow and film when you don't have that much stuff. I was working on other things, so now here we are back on this project. We're really close, and I'd like to get it final done. Wire the blinkers, you know, this front clip on there, and the point where I'm at right now is I was missing some bracketry, like the bottom stay for the radiator. So I'm going to fabricate that and just fix a couple other things that I noticed while I was running it around. I ended up eliminating the servo on the exhaust because it was acting up and it had bad gears in it. And I don't think I'm going to order another one. I'll probably just bypass it. So this runs pretty good. It's a strong runner. And, you know, we're just going to probably sell it. But, you know, it's fun to play with it now while I have it. It's kind of a fun project to build. I don't really need it because I have the Triumph, so. It's fast though, it's definitely faster than the Triumph, but it's a race bike and I'm more of a touring rider. I don't know, it'd be fun on the track, but I live on an island, so it's too hard to go to track days, but for what I have into it, it would be pretty fun to take to a track. Anyway, here we are.